Thank you for tuning in to Lighty Automation Tech Tips. Today we're going to discuss the Numatics ISO 5599/2 series valve in their solenoid pilot version. Solenoid pilot valves need a solenoid pilot pressure, which as a standard valve we're ready to receive from whatever is supplied to the valve in gallery 1. So for example, a customer wants to supply in gallery 1 air pressure to the base that is supplied in gallery 1 of the valve. Internal to the valve then we split pressure off and send it to both solenoid pilots for proper operation. We recently had a customer call and wanted to introduce into the equation a dual pressure regulator, such as thus. They want to be able to sandwich this between the manifold block and the valve as such to supply dual pressure to the valve to extend at one pressure and retract at another. In this situation, we supply air pressure to 1 as we were previously. It comes into the riser block of the regulator in gallery 1, splits that off to each regulator. From the regulator then we're regulated down to our pressures that we select, and from there we're actually going into the valve in port 3 and port 5. This is where problems are then created. Someone will change out and add a dual pressure regulator and suddenly the valve is not operating correctly or at all. The valve is ready to accept the pressure from 1, but we're supplying it at 3 and 5. And as I mentioned before, that decision in this series of valve is done in the body of the valve. So what we're going to show you today is how to change around the valve to get this to operate when we're supplying in 3 or 5. Now all this is spelled out in the catalog in the ISO 5599/2, and you're going to see body parts of the valve, and you're going to see a pretty long-winded and detailed chart as to what plugs are available, where they're located on the body of the valve, and what plugs need to be added and or subtracted to modify the valve. This is relatively easily done, but it can create a lot of confusion on the floor of the factory. That's why we're going to do a alteration here so that we're able to supply this valve from port 3 and port 5. In this situation, your solenoids are held on with a plastic knurled knob. Simply unscrew that plastic knurled knob. You'll notice that there is an O-ring here. We're trying to seal the surface to IP67. We want to remove the solenoid and pop that off. Make sure you retain your O-ring. This is now going to expose your solenoid pilot assembly. We use a 3mm Allen wrench to remove this assembly. 2 cap screws. Loosen those up, and you'll notice that that's my electrical connection. That's where my solenoid actually plugs in so that I'm able to get my power from underneath the valve. When you remove those 2 cap screws, you're going to notice that the wires are connected. That is hardwired to the receptacle at the base of the valve. So you want to be cautious not to damage those. When you remove those, please note you got a gasketed surface here. It is in a web, so it should be retained. We're going to zoom in here and show you the galleries that we're referring to. In this case, to change this from receiving the pilot pressure from 1 to 3, that port right there labeled as Q in the catalog from Numatics is the one we want to remove. That's a little plug with an Allen wrench. We want to go ahead and remove that plug, and that now is going to open up the 3 gallery, and we want to take that plug, and if we can zoom in here we can identify exactly where that needs to go. In gallery 1 of the base itself, you'll notice that right down here there is a port that we need to plug. So we remove the cap screw from Q and we place it in 1. That stops the air from port number 1 going from there and allows port number 3. Once we have that done, simple reassembly, making sure that our gaskets are still in our webs to provide nice good seals and not to pinch any of the gaskets. Snug those guys up. Replace our solenoid. You'll notice we've got dowel pins on our solenoid so that we have great integrity. If something should hit the solenoid, the dowel pins are not going to bend our stem. Make certain you replace your O-ring. Fasten that up. Now we have a valve that is ready to receive pilot supply from your port 3. A very major key here in this situation is that you alter the part number of the valve. You have just changed the valve's function. It is going to receive its pilot supply from port 3. If someone later down the road needs to replace this valve, the part number that is currently on the valve is not correct. Please reference the catalog depending on which side you change, either from 3 or from 5, will change the option code on the valve. As you can see, this is very easy to do, but you don't want to create headache for maintenance situations down the road when lines are down and put the wrong part back on the machine should you have an issue. Thank you very much for joining us today on Lighty Automation Tech Tips. We hope that you surf around and take a look at some of the other advice that we have on our products.